Hello, everybody. I'm Justin Crossley.
I'm Travis Comble, and this is Brew Strong.
It is Bruce Strong, and I'm excited to be here filling in for my good friend Jamil Zainasheff once again. He's a little under the weather, but getting better, I hear. And so we always want the show to go on, and that especially goes for Jamil. He loves this show so much and loves you guys, his audience, that he's like, come on, man, we got to keep the show going. So Travis and me are holding down the fort while our dude gets better. And we've got a wonderful guest with us tonight, too. And I think we're going to be talking about fining beer and finings. Do I have that right, Travis?
That's correct.
All right.
Finings.
Finings, yes.
Yes.
Which I'm sure have evolved so much over the years. It's always one of my favorite questions to ask really good breweries is whether or not they use finings or filters.
Yeah.
And it really it runs the gamut. Like all sorts of breweries of all sizes choose one or the other. So it's a cool thing to talk about, I think. Um,
Absolutely.
and
So,
our guest tonight to help us
sorry.
do that is Huggy. Huggy Bear is on the show with us. And Huggy Bear is from Flix Brewhouse. At least that's where he's professionally brewing at the moment. Flix Brewhouse out of Mansfield, Texas, which is a cool concept. I think I want to have you guys on my show on the session. Flix Brewhouse combines a movie theater with a brew pub, right?
Yeah, yeah. How's it going, guys? Yeah, so we have 10 locations and we're the only cinema brew pub out there right now. So that kind of gives us an advantage. We can make fresh beer at each location, and we have core beers, and then we tailor local beers to each market.
Nice.
Very
The
nice.
best thing about this, and I'm going to repeat this when I have you guys on my own show, is the concept would allow me to stop smuggling beer into every movie I go to.
Yeah,
You know, because even the movie houses that have like a little bit of beer, because most of them are allowed to do that now, it's not that good. Let's be honest. So
yeah,
to have a brew pub right there is pretty cool.
Well, I tell you, Flix
yeah.
has to be doing it right because here in Texas, they do have competition with, I mean, you can go to a movie theater that has 50 taps,
Wow.
but not
That's
brewed in-house. So,
I see.
I got to
Okay.
get some of Huggy's beer while I'm watching. I don't even care what movie it is. If you got something on a $2 sale, that's the one I'm going to so I can drink some Huggy beer.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the show. And we're going to learn a little bit more about you in just a minute. We want to know just a little bit of background, but I first want to thank our wonderful sponsor, who's been the sponsor of Brew Strong for all of these years, and that's Blickman Engineering. And in fact, recently we had the new president of Blickman Engineering. Drew Barnes was on Brew Strong with us in our last episode. And I don't know about you, Travis. I had a blast talking to Drew, and
Yes.
so I hope he does a bunch of shows here on Brew Strong because he was super fun to talk to.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and they have nothing but quality products. And I don't care if you're going with their Blickman line, which is outstanding. I don't their Anvil line, which they call I'm not sure. I mean, they call it the step down, but they've got features on the Anvil stuff that you don't even get with the Blickman stuff. I use the Foundry, which is electronic kettle, etc. Um, Pre-program my mash temperature, get it warmed up for me when I wake up. My water's at temperature for me to start mashing in, and then they have the pro stuff now. And Jamil likes to talk about their skinny fermenter. I'm not sure why he's fixated on the tall skinny stuff,
Yeah,
but their skinny fermenter they can roll through doors. You know,
interesting. Yeah,
I'm not rolling 3 barrel fermenters personally, but I mean, Huggy and I probably know some guys that might need to. It's yeah, in 3 barrel. What was he was talking last time? They were designing a 100 barrel fermenter.
wow.
Oof,
Yeah. Yeah. They do it
that's
all. It just gets better with those guys.
Yeah, go listen to the show because we do talk about some of their newer innovations and where Drew thinks the company's going. And he even describes how the Anvil brand came about. And it's pretty cool. We give some good comparisons to like tool companies, right? Like you can get You can buy your Snap-on, you can buy your Blickman, but maybe you buy the Craftsman and you still know it's awesome quality, but it's more within your wallet range. So a bunch of stuff like that on the show. And just go thank Blickman for bringing you Brew Strong after all of these years. Let's see, the Brewing Network's about to be 20. And so I think that makes Brew Strong at least 18 and maybe even 19 years old. Jamil started with us pretty early on. So Blickman's been supporting us for a really long time, and we just love him for it. So, well, Huggy, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're living in Texas, and how long have you been brewing, including home brewing?
Okay, including home brewing. Yeah, so I've been, oh man, when did I start home brewing? I think I started home brewing in around '09 and home brewed for a few years, entered some competitions. Yeah, I did enter Dixie Cup. Jamil was a guest judge that year for best of he was judging, and then they did best of show, and my beer came up, and he said I had a 50-point saison.
Nice.
So
Nice.
once he said that, and I had a few medals, I was like, all right, I can do this. I used to be an engineer, just didn't click with me. Wasn't super happy, so I looked at my hobbies. Making beer was one, and then so started volunteering at breweries. Back when that was the thing. I volunteered at a couple big breweries in town, and another one called No Label out in Katy on the west side of Houston.
Okay.
And then after volunteering there about a year, or about 6 months, they said, "All right, we can give you a job. It's going to be about 6 months or so." So got in there, and then yeah, first job there was they hired me as a brewer directly. So
Amazing.
all the learning was on the job. Yeah. So did that. I was there for just under 5 years. Went up to Southern Star Brewing on the north side of Houston. Then I had an opportunity to open my own brew pub. So we did that in downtown Houston, and then we opened February 28th, 2020.
Ooh,
So the
ballsy
timing,
move.
yeah, timing wasn't great on that.
Yeah.
We spent all our money. We hired our staff, trained everyone.
Ah,
Did our soft opening, and we're literally about to do our grand opening on that Friday, March 19th or 17th or whatever it was,
yeah.
when everything shut down. So
Yep.
that was a struggle.
That's heartbreaking. Did you guys end up opening?
Yeah, we opened, and then
Okay.
we had a full restaurant. We were a full brew pub, so we had a full restaurant. That let us stay open in in Texas. They said everything shut down for a little bit, but then they said you could do to go. So we immediately pivoted and started. We were closed one day, and then we're selling food and beer out the door.
Yeah.
We had a crowler machine, so we were doing crowlering everything. But it was just too much of a struggle, and then after a while, it was just too much. So ended up selling it to another group. Came in and sold it. I moved on to another brewery,
Okay.
and then worked there a few years, and then now I'm up on the south side of Dallas. So I've been brewing for 12 years professionally, and then about 3 years, or so as a home brewer before that.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what you're doing. It sounds like you've got some experience under your belt, both in life and business and brewing.
Yeah, I think I learned opening the brewery is, everyone always says, "Hey, you should make your own beer." So I started making my own beer. At first, I was like, "I don't want to try to make my own beer." All the homebrew I had was awful, terrible. And then I had some good
Wasn't
homebrew. I was
mine.
like,
I didn't know
"Oh,
him then.
Yeah.
no, it wasn't true." But then I had some good stuff, and I was like, "Oh, it's not bad. Let me try this." And since being an engineer, I had that mindset, wanted to play around, and then brewed with a friend, and then got hooked, started homebrewing. They said, "Hey, you should work at a brewery." I said, "Why would I want to do that?" And then I started doing that. And they said, "Hey, you should open your own brewery." And I was like, "Why would I want to open my own brewery?" And then I did that.
Right.
So just all these things I said I wouldn't do, I ended up doing, but then realized, yeah, I don't want to do that.
And I know brewers who had owned their own brewery for a long time and still ended up enjoying more going back to just being a brewer. And I don't mean just in a negative way. I mean like this is what I like doing. And so and if I'm running the whole business, it's quite different. It's pretty stressful, right? So you've
Yeah, for
probably
sure.
wrapped your head around this already, but it sounds like it might have just been a blessing in disguise that
Yeah, no, it was an opportunity. I could say I own my own business. I did all that, and now I can, come out the other side, and that's just not for me.
Yeah.
I prefer just making the beer. So I'm the head brewer at a brewery at Flix in Mansfield, and
There
so
you
I'm
go.
the one making all the beer there. And I do have some. We do have to do some of the business stuff. We have some P&L. We
Mhm.
do have to keep it profitable. We do have to cost everything out. So, but I'm not the ultimate. I get to go home and sleep at night without too many worries.
I love that. I love that for you. I wonder what that's like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sitting in my bar right now. I don't think I've slept since COVID. Yeah,
yeah.
figuring that out. Probably look like it. Well, Travis, how about we get a definition on our topic for today for findings? Do you want to tackle that or Huggy?
Huggy, that's because you're going to be doing most of the talking on what we're talking about here, Huggy. So nice, compact definition of findings.
Yeah, so I looked up in the Oxford Companion to Beer by Garrett Oliver,
Hmm.
and he defines it as findings are processing aids added to unfiltered beer to remove yeast and protein haze. Basically, it's an additive you add to the beer that it's not meant to be, not to change the taste, only in a positive way, to clarify it, to clear it up in the appearance or the taste, to drop out things you don't want.
It's about as simple as it gets right there. Yeah.
Very direct.
Okay. And then, of course, and we're going to dive into this probably after a quick break, but there's all sorts of different ways you can do it, right? And I think that's what we're going to talk about here. Different processes, different types of findings. It's not just a finding. There's not a jar that just says findings, and that's everything, I assume. Right?
No, no,
It
definitely
might be,
not.
but you
There's a
probably
lot
don't
of
want to
different
buy
kinds.
it.
Yeah. I like to keep things very simple, so that's what I would do. All right, why don't we take a real quick break? And when we come back, we're going to learn all about findings with Huggy and Travis. Hang in there. You're listening to Brew Strong. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Brew Strong. I'm your host today, Justin Crosley, filling in for my friend Jamil Zainasheff. And we've got Huggy Bear on the show to talk to us, teach me and Travis about findings, all the different kinds, and how to use them, and maybe some of the advantages and different disadvantages of different ones. So why don't we start with we got our definition. Why don't we start with what types of findings there are?
Yeah, so there's a couple kinds. One is basically the two kind of hierarchies is you have a charged finding. It's got a positive or a negative charge, and so it attracts particles of the opposite charge and drags them down once it gets big enough. And then you have other kinds like silica. They have pores which can adsorb, which means the material clings onto the side of it. And the same thing, once you have a large clump, it'll flocculate out down to the bottom. So you kind of have the two basic kinds. You have a charged one, either positive or negative, and then you have the kind of the shaped one,
Okay.
uh,
Can
which
I
is
ask you
kind of silica is kind of one.
can I ask you the dumbest chemistry question in the world? The
You can try.
the the charged one, it just comes that way, like it's made that way, or like something has to happen to it to become a charged particle, like in the process of
uh,
using it.
yeah, so there's some not there's natural there's naturally occurring ones and artificial ones, man-made ones. And some of the natural ones are kind of like isinglass, which is fish bladders. It does have like it just has like a slight charge to it that it doesn't.
It's a naturally
uh
occurring
Yeah.
charge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
an
yeah,
outstanding
yeah,
question.
exactly.
You ask some of the greatest questions, I swear, Justin, because you break it down, you bring it back, like, hey, wait a second, you
Yeah.
guys went to here. Let's start right here, and that's a wonderful question. So I mean, it's interesting because isinglass is what, fish bladder?
Yeah, that's the ground up fish bladder. And the thought is that one is they were used to store beer in, bladders, bags. You had to store beer in liquid somewhere. And so fish bladders are one type of vessel that they use. They figured out they could use, and it turned out the beer that they poured from that was clear. And it turns out that it's because of the fish bladder itself.
Okay.
But the fish bladder has no reason to be charged, and yet it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
And
I don't
We
I don't know the
don't have to
biology
run it through
behind it.
some nukes. We don't have to, hit it with some protons. It's just charged. That's a great question, Justin. It's
well,
really, really
it
cool
feels
question.
silly because I know that we're not like, hooking up batteries to our fermenter, right? Like I'm aware that
I hope
that's
not.
not the process, but I still, yeah, I just wonder if there's
No,
some
it's a great
process
question.
that has to be done. Okay, so there's the naturally occurring, but then you said that there's maybe one that's not naturally occurring charged?
Yeah. So they can create. You can, all of the materials, chemistry. You have different products are made, and so
Yeah.
they can be made. They can be man-made, and
Okay.
so the the ones made from naturally occurring, made from animals, well, those aren't vegetarian or vegan. So then they try to come up with alternate ways of artificially
Huh.
making those kind of same things.
Okay. That totally makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And then the other one you said is like silica. Was that the right word?
Yeah, silica. It's like um, it's kind of similar to like with sand, and
Mhm.
so it has the little pores. It's very porous, and it'll adsorb, so the material will stick to it. And depending on if you use in beer, you want to use the right material that it only attracts the particles you don't want. Because if you use the wrong one, you can kill your head retention. Because head retention is protein, and so if and it's at a certain size, so you want to use the particles that will attract the smaller proteins rather than the large foam enhancing protein.
That's
Got
pore
it.
size. Yeah, yeah. So what I do when I don't brew beer, which is most of the time I don't brew beer, actually have to work for a living. We use certain desiccants as adsorption, as he's talking about, but pulling moisture out of like ethylene. Pore
Mm.
size matters. Yeah,
Okay.
larger pores will pull things you don't want to pull. You have to have the right size pour, and you might have to treat that afterwards. And we don't do that much processing with beer. You're not gonna pull something out, then reprocess it and put it back into beer because that's a lot of work for one. And that's okay. What are we doing with our beer now? We're adding stuff back. That's going to get weird. So that's really interesting. Yeah, I can't wait for you to tell us about silica, how it works and what it pulls out. That's really cool.
And
Yeah, yeah.
then I can assume that the scientists that are making these are figuring that out for me, right? Like, or do you really choose a which type of silica fining based on, hey, this one I know I need to pull out more stuff, so I'm going to use this brand. This one I barely need to pull stuff out, so I'm going to use this brand that won't affect head retention.
Yeah, some of them are just different brands from different companies that make them. Um, and then some of them it depends on the haze you're trying to clear. So you can have protein haze, you can have yeast haze, and you can have polyphenol haze. So it depends on if you're trying to drop your haze out, uh, you got to use the right thing to clear what you're trying to clear out.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, okay, and then just a question between the two, the sort of naturally occurring, like the isinglass and the silica. You've already explained that the naturally occurring is not really vegan or vegetarian, so that's one difference. Are there other reasons why you might choose one over the other, a naturally occurring over a silica, in terms of like
Uh,
effectiveness or anything like that?
yeah, I mean yeah. So like isinglass is very effective, but it's not. Again, it's not vegan
Mhm.
because it's made from fish. Same with like gelatin. It's made from horse hooves and things like that. I can't think of
No
a,
idea how they make
not sure if
gelatin
there's
from
any
horse hooves,
specific
but
reasons.
Yeah,
no one ever said Jello is for Mr. Ed. I don't know. It's weird.
yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Uh, and then just like, ballpark. And I guess maybe I'm talking about brands or something, or maybe they are types. Like you said, it does depend on what you're trying to pull out. How many different types of these two findings are there? Are we talking hundreds that you have to choose from, or is there really only a few things that a brewery uses?
I've only seen maybe less a dozen or so, maybe just
Okay.
kind of different brands, different. Again, they kind of have the different size particles, um, and then some of them you can use. Some of them are used in wine, but they don't want to use them in beer because they affect foam and head retention, which you don't have that in wine, so you don't care about that. So they work great in wine, but if you use them in beer, they're gonna strip all your head out.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Got
would say most of the brands to a home brewer have been entirely generic by who's distributing the product,
it.
almost until now we see like Cellar Science as a brand. They sell all kinds of everything to do whatever you want to your beer, not just Finings. But I know they have like what do you call the silicate style? They have the silicate style
Mhm.
fining for adding to your keg. So yeah, it's Justin it's been so generic to us homebrewers for a couple decades here,
Yeah.
and it kind of mostly still is, unless you're looking for something very specific.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
and I'd also say it depends on where in the process you use it. You'll use different kinds.
okay. And I know we're going to talk about the different parts, but are there mash findings too, like something that we use right at the beginning, or does all of this happen sort of after mash?
Well, you do have beer stone, which is formed from oxalic acid in the mash. And so if you add calcium, you create a calcium oxalate, and you'll precipitate out most of that beer stone before you even lauter into the kettle.
Oh, right. Okay.
So that is kind of it's not technically a fining, but it kind of has the same effect of you're adding something, calcium to the mash to act as a clarifier.
And is that different than like the calcium you might add to enhance hop flavor? Is that calcium carbonate you might add for that?
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, you'll add it in the same. It'll give you the same effect.
Okay.
But obviously in the mash, using it in the mash is going to be uh, diluted down versus adding it straight to the kettle. But it's the same. It's the same calcium.
Okay, got it.
And to your question, you have calcium carbonate, calcium was it sulfide? So depending on which sulfate, yeah, thank you. Depending on which direction you want your beer to go in, you add whichever calcium you need.
I see.
But I never really thought of it as anything like a fining. But to Huggy's point, if you don't have enough calcium in there, you're going to have a nice yeasty beer at the end of the day, almost guaranteed, or more yeast than you might expect. The calcium is very important.
It'll help with, it's like you can add multiple finings as well to help clear. I've always heard the clearer the beer is going from each step of the process, the clearer your beer you're going to get in your glass.
That makes sense. In the super early days of the Brewing Network, Doc used to tell us to like even scoop off the muck off the top of our homebrew kettle. He's like, "What? You don't want that in there. It'll just make it clearer later." And I think that's been sort of debunked. Like, just leave whatever's in there. It's fine. But yeah,
I know brewers that go both ways still.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But sounds
pros aren't going to skim that, right, Huggy?
No, I don't have the time to do that.
It'd be hilarious. You're just in there with a giant ladle.
Yeah, a big colander dragging it across.
Oh man! But it does. So if I heard you right, though, is there not a brew where I wouldn't put some calcium in the mash? I mean, it sounds like there's no reason not to put some calcium in the mash.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on if you want calcium in there or not. It depends on your water too, because if you have water that's high in calcium, you may not want to add much more than what you already got, or high in sulfates or chlorides or whatever.
Got it.
So if you're looking at your water chemistry, you don't want to overload one to try to help with the other.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Well, it sounds like we could move to, and we'll take a break first, but we could move to like the different steps in the brewing and where we would use these findings. What do you think, Travis?
I think that's about where we're at. Unless, Huggy, you have anything else you want to finish up on the variety of findings in general. I think we're up to that. Let's step through the brewing process and what we use when.
No, I think if that's clear, yeah, we can move on.
Perfect. Let's take a quick break here on Brew Strong. When we come back, we're going to learn about brew day findings, fermentation findings, and of course, finishing and packaging findings, because you can use them in every step of the process to make sure you have perfectly clear beer. So hang in there. You're tuned in to Brew Strong, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Brew Strong. Thanks for listening today. I'm Justin. I'm filling in for Jamil, and we are talking with Huggy Bear from Flix Brewhouse, and he's teaching us about findings, as you know. And before we left off, we were describing all the different types, and now we're going to talk about like where you might use them. And I do want to say, I was mentioning that I know pro brewers who filter and use a centrifuge, and I know great brewers who just use findings. And I have seen perfectly crystal clear beer out of both, right? So this is kind of the awesome thing about learning about findings, is that if you don't want to mess with filtering, if you don't want to spend on filtering, you can have brilliantly clear. Like I've seen Pilsners like they came out of a centrifuge, right? They're just amazing. And so
Yeah.
let's talk about the different places we might use them, starting with on the brew day.
Yeah, so like I said, you can add calcium to your mash to precipitate out your calcium oxalate, um, your beer stone, so that helps with clarity. I think that's the only one I can think of for the mash. And then for the kettle, you can add your Irish moss, which is made from seaweed, and that'll help coagulate all your proteins.
Mhm.
Coagulate meaning to kind of gather together into
And when I
bigger
was
clumps.
homebrewing, that was just like a standard. We just always added the Irish moss in homebrewing, right? Like in the kettle. There's no reason not to put that in there, right?
That was pre-NEPA days.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that if you're going for a New England IPA, maybe you don't put that in there. Got it.
Yeah.
Well, even still, I've used it. I use it in my NEPAs, and it'll drop out some of the larger proteins that you don't want necessarily.
Okay.
It doesn't. I haven't seen it affect, in my experience at least, um, with that polyphenol haze that you get from New England IPAs.
Okay.
Then you can also add carrageenan, which is made from Irish moss. It's kind of a carrageenan is in Irish moss, and it's a clarified form, so it's kind of purified, so it's even stronger, kind of intensified. And again, that shouldn't affect your stability, your
Is
haze stability in your
Whirlflock one
NEPAs.
of those too?
Yeah, Whirlflock, Coppa Clear. There's kind of different brand names for that, basically.
For
Okay.
the Irish moss, or for the carrageenan, or for somewhere in between, or for they don't want to tell us because it's proprietary?
Yeah.
For the carrageenan, yeah, Whirlflock and Coppa
Ah,
Clear are both forms of the carrageenan, which
gotcha,
is just
gotcha.
an intensified Irish moss.
Okay. I think Warflock's what I always used. It just was the
Yeah,
only. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
Warflock to
it's
me
a
was
brand name,
it's like Kleenex though. To me, I could have been
right?
using anything, and I'm going to call it Warflock, right? So
Right,
You go to the
and that's
homebrew
tricky
shop, he
too.
sells you a little baggie of some pills, and you say, "Yeah, it's Whirlflock. I'll take it."
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's tricky on some of these trying to research because they don't want to tell you. It's kind of like generic drugs. They don't want to tell you that they don't want to tell you the generic names. Then you can just buy the generic,
right.
or buy the other
Right.
brand of that same drug, or whatever. So it's kind of tricky sometimes finding what the base is, what the generic is. Kind of.
Sure.
So these are pulling out. You said proteins.
Yeah, these are mostly for proteins. Yeah, in the kettle because that's where you get your hot break, and your cold break is in your kettle, and that's mostly proteins from the malt.
And is this a polarized or non-polarized?
Yeah. So I know. I can't remember. I can't remember which charge it is, but yes, it is. I
So
believe it's charged.
it's charged, but we don't know if it's positive or negative at this 10 seconds. Yeah. So it is
I
charged. So
well,
proteins
yes,
or this protein. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, I'm not sure on that one. I'll have to double check.
Well, for me, charge is enough.
Yep.
I'm not gonna pull out my multimeter and figure out which way it goes.
Well, and
I'm
that's the
good.
thing too is the different like yeast cell walls have a negative charge, so you need to use a to clarify yeast out, which is
Wow.
not until you add the yeast, and you're not going to use any clarifiers for yeast before you pitch yeast, obviously.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
and then also in the kettle is, or sorry, yeah, in the kettle side is silica sol. So it's a silica solution. It's a solution of silica. Again, we talked about the silica, and
Mhm.
that's used. That's a negative charge, and so that goes in the kettle, and so that drops out. That clarifies in your kettle. So it's the same thing. Instead of using the um, Whirlflock, you just using the silica instead.
So
That
it's one
tells
or
me
the
that
other. It's not both.
Yeah, I wouldn't use both. I just use one or the other.
Okay.
yeah, that tells me the carrageenan slash Whirlflock slash Irish moss is probably negative for anyone who's gonna formulate their own. But that's an interesting product. I'm not even familiar with that one, Huggy. Is that available on homebrew scale, or is that something you buy as a pro?
I know we can get it as a pro. I haven't used it. I've talked to some vendors and because we use a similar brand in the fermenter, but they also have you can use a similar product in the kettle to kind of get a similar effect on the hot side. And this one it's silica, so it is natural silica, but it's not made from animals, so it's a little more vegan
Okay.
vegetarian friendly.
So
Okay.
yeah, not synthetic, not from animal. It's a sweet spot if you're looking for something along those lines. And many breweries are looking for something along those lines. specifically. I use Whirlflock. Don't think twice about it. I don't use isinglass, but I guess Whirlflock is still vegan friendly, right? Being
Should be.
Yeah,
or
because it's made
Irish
from algae.
moss. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Irish moss, which is
Okay.
algae, seaweed.
Yeah. So I'm not poisoning
I would
vegans
call it
yet.
I
Okay.
would call it vegan positive even. It's if it's made from algae and seaweed, that's more than vegan friendly.
There you
That's
go.
Yeah.
Vegan
uh
pro.
right. Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah.
All
Yep.
right. So that's the kettle. And it sounds like, I mean, the only reason you would not use the Werflock or something is if you're struggling with clarity, then you might want to move on to trying the silica. Because like you said, you haven't even tried the silica in your own kettle. So clearly you're not
I,
having issues with clarity, right?
yeah, and we also on the homebrewers can do this too, but they call it Eimhoff cones. It's a little cone, like a clear shaped cone that you can do it with wort, you can do it with beer. It kind of depends on which stage of the process you're trying to clarify. And for testing out your findings, you
Ah,
can create a dosage. So you put a fixed amount in your cone of liquid, and you add your findings in different amounts, and you can kind of test to see what the clarity looks like. You kind
all
of do a
right.
side by side of everything. And so
Okay.
this lets you test, and it's going to be beer specific. It depends on your gravity, hops, like it depends on everything. So they
Mhm.
recommend that you change your dosage depending on the beer that you're brewing.
Got it.
Yeah. We should have done this show live stream from his brewery.
Yeah, totally. That's a cool
Yeah.
concept. And is it like an overnight test or is that almost instantaneous or what?
No, I mean it'll take it goes pretty quick, within an
Okay.
hour or so you can see the effects, and it'll tell you your dosage. You can see if it's too low, just right. Kind of like Goldilocks. It's like
Yeah.
not enough, too much, and then even the too much. I was going to talk about it later, but one thing you can get is fluffy bottoms. You got to be careful not to
I
get
always
fluffy
worry about
bottoms.
that. Yeah.
At
At my
Yeah.
age.
You're
so
gonna
fluffy
give us details
bottoms,
on that.
yeah. So fluffy bottoms is when you use too much findings, and it doesn't settle out into a compact uh, on the bottom, and so it kind of stays fluffy in suspension near the bottom. And
Mm,
so I've known some breweries. If you use too much findings, it'll create this cloud in the bottom, and it's not totally clear. There's no clear distinction between the compact stuff and your clear beer. And so
yeah.
when they go to transfer or go to keg or bottle or something, it's going to be still cloudy and hazy at the bottom there.
Okay.
Which
And
is
so,
opposite what you'd think. You'd think, okay, I use a
Yeah,
little bit extra, it's going to be tight. Like I've heard, we use zinc these days as a yeast nutrient, and I've heard you use too much zinc and you make a yeast concrete brick at the bottom.
mm,
mm,
Yeast might anyway, but with these findings, instead of packing up tighter, they might just we're just gonna take this whole big old space to do our job. That's it's not good, man. It's not good stuff. That's
and it
yeah,
just like it results in a
yeah.
volume loss, is what you're saying too, right?
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
that whole bottom.
because if you gotta cut, especially on the pro side, if you gotta cut your if you're kegging and then all of a sudden you get this cloudy, or even as you start kegging and it's cloudy from the start until you pull through all that, you're just gonna have to either it'll settle naturally over time, but it's gonna take much, much, much longer. And
Mhm.
that's what all these findings you talked about with centrifuges and filtering. If you just let it sit in the fermenter long enough, it'll be crystal clear. But a lot of people don't have the time necessarily, especially on the pro side where you're limited on tank space.
Sure. Okay. All right. So that covers kettle, right? Um, and then we get into post kettle, so fermentation findings, right?
Yeah. So ferment, yeah. In the fermenter side, you can use isinglass. We talked about that. That's non-vegan, made from fish platters, but that'll pull out your proteins, your polyphenols, and your yeast. So it does a
So
very good job of clarifying.
so you'd use that as fermentation is finishing or finished, and even if you use it in the kettle, you could still use it in the fermenter.
Yeah, you can use a little bit in the fermenter because this is what they used for the English
Oh,
when
you
they
said
make casks.
sorry.
They'll add isinglass to the cask,
Hmm.
and they get a crystal clear cask coming out,
Yeah,
even
sorry.
though
I was
post fermentation.
I was out of sync on that because we talked about it before we talked about the winds. Yeah, isinglass. Yeah, yeah, okay. So that pulls proteins and yeast, isinglass.
Yeah, so that'll pull everything. That works really great, but it's not vegan, so it's kind of frowned upon by a lot of people.
Right, right.
Right.
And then you have gelatin, again, not vegan, and it's not quite as effective as isinglass. That'll pull the protein and polyphenols out. And I know a lot of homebrewers use that. It's cheap, it's easy. You can buy it at the grocery store.
Hmm.
I've had experience with it, and to me it's a little tricky to use. You can't heat it too much because then it turns into Jello, which I've learned that.
Yeah, I've done it. Okay.
You've used that before, Travis, right?
Yes, I
With
have.
gelatin.
Yeah. Yeah,
What do you use?
not to
What?
great effect.
Okay, so it didn't work as great for you. Again, I think
Well,
it's a dosage thing.
I used it once or twice, and I used it when I was a much newer brewer, and I used it because I needed to use something really quickly. I had a keg I had to turn around for a beer event as homebrewers were bringing beer, and I don't know if it did any good at all, but the beer was fine,
Mhm.
relatively. No one that was getting free beer out of the keg that I brought was complaining.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
Um,
Some of our buddies use a lot of gelatin all the time. I don't have the experience with it.
yeah, I used it a couple times as a home brewer, and I had trouble with it, and I think it's kind of just based on experience and practice. The more you use it, the better you get at it.
So on that one makes me nervous because you take the package of however much you're gonna make, and you boil it. So now you're on a stovetop or something. You're
But you
not
don't want
gonna.
to boil
I'm
it.
not gonna.
You want to heat it, but you don't want to boil
Right.
it.
So
Once you
I'm usually
boil it,
heating
then it
it.
starts to set.
I'm heating it on my stove. The least sanitary place in my house.
Well, yeah, that's why if you get it up to 160 or so, just for
uh-huh.
a minute or two, you'll pasteurize it basically.
Throw a sheet of foil on top of my pot. And then you have to wait for it to cool because if you add it too hot, you're doing weird things with your beer. So
Hmm.
it always seemed like a lot to do when I could use lesser things to do a similar process, like a teaspoon or a half a tablespoon of probably the next products or you're going to talk about. So it always made me nervous adding gelatin. It seemed like a good
Yeah,
point where I could really mess my beer up.
I think it's one of those things back when you homebrewed back in the when it first started, even before it got legal. It was just something people discovered as a way to clarify their beer that you could easily access.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Nowadays,
absolutely.
yeah, there's a lot more options out
Mhm.
Yeah. So not sold on this one. We can move to the next one. I'm not using it.
there.
So
I'm
many
good.
listeners, I promise you, use gelatin to great effect. I'm
Right.
just not
Yeah.
one of them.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can use again the silica sole in the fermenter. Biofine Clear is a brand. Um, it's negatively charged, and that'll drop out your proteins and colloids. And this can be used in the fermenter or your bright, even when you're crashing. Now you do want to use it at certain temperatures. You don't want to use it too warm or too cold. So usually you want to use it while you're dropping your temperature down. But it's one of those you can use on the hot side and the cold side to similar
Yeah.
effect.
So yeah, Tom in our chat right now. Tom, who's live listening, as all of you should be live listening to us. Tom Goodwin, probably one of
Nice.
your friends, Justin.
Hi, Tom.
He reminded me of the Cellar Science product. It's called Silifine, and that's
Hmm.
their
Okay.
version of Biofine Clear.
Okay.
Yeah. So silicone, silicon,
Yeah, Silifine.
silica.
Yeah. So yeah, I think Biofine is gelatin. Biofine Clear is the silica product that I use, but now I use Silifine because I don't mean to plug Cellar Science. Unless they're paying you, Justin, and we can plug them all day long.
Not
They
yet.
sell
They
you a
should.
nice. They should. They should. They sell you a nice quart with a little measuring thing, kind of like a Star San, who should be paying you a Star
Uh-huh.
San bottle.
Nice.
You can measure it out, drop it into your keg before you transfer into it, and that's what I use.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and since that's a liquid solution,
Mhm.
it's easy to dose into your beer because it's already in a liquid form,
Yep.
and so it'll disperse more easily than when you're adding a solid. You have to mix it well, and so it's a little trickier to do that versus the liquid will mix a lot easier.
So that's a great point. Yeah. So a solid, you kind of got to rouse somehow in your fermenter. Um, Would you do any rousing or mixing with the liquid, or do you just trust that it's going to fully disperse?
Yeah, no, we in the brewery I use it, and we use it on transfer. So whenever we transfer
Okay.
from one tank, so we transfer from the fermenter to the bright tank, we'll add it. And so the transfer process that it'll mix it up. I heard of, and I know of some brewers that'll add it to the fermenter, but then they still will burst CO2 through the bottom to mix their tank,
Hmm.
or they'll hook a pump and kind of mix up the tank for a few minutes. You still want to mix it in some way. It's not gonna naturally mix. It's just easier to mix once it's in liquid form, though.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, as home
Yeah.
brewers, we do the fun keg shake where
Yeah.
I have no idea if we're doing any good whatsoever. We got a 5 gallon corny that's damn near full, a tablespoon of this stuff at the bottom, and almost 5 gallons on top of it. And we sit there and we shake and shake and shake and shake it. A minute, because a
But
minute's the right number.
when I was actually using good practices that I learned from other people on this show, I would and I had Jamil's cool conical fermenter for more beer, and um fermentation was done, and I didn't really use Finings in the fermenter. Maybe I should have, based on Huggy's advice here. But what I would do is then transfer it to a closed corny keg. There's methods of doing that, obviously, so that it's CO2 purged and it's closed. And in that
Mhm.
case, I would have put the either liquid or solid at the bottom of this corny keg, which is effectively a home brewer's bright. It was my bright tank, right?
Yep.
Goes to that, and just the transfer alone, similar to what Huggy's saying a pro would do. I felt that it was, especially liquid, sufficiently mixing up that liquid. So I wasn't even doing the corny shake. That was like my pro version of the corny shake, right? So I'm just saying
Right.
there's the corny shake because it's simple. So don't worry if that's your simple method. But there are other ways. If you've got a fermenter and you're going to a corny as a bright, you can do it that way too, right?
Yeah. And and with the homebrew side, there are some things you can do on the homebrew side. I can't take my fermenter and shake it.
Right.
So or
Or
my
your brights for
my
that
keg,
matter. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
sometimes there's some things that are easier on the homebrew side for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not going to put hydraulics on your bright to.
Yeah. Now the forklift, no, it's a bad idea. That's
I know I do know a brewery that did they would carbonate in their kegs. They didn't have a bright tank, so they'd carb up in their kegs, and they made a device that would tilt and shake a whole pallet of kegs at a time while they were carving it up to get carb it faster.
that's
Oh, wow.
and that clearly was a home brewer turned pro. I mean, come on. That's yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I can't believe Blickman didn't jump on an idea like that.
Yeah, they
I
might
totally
have
can believe Blickman did not jump on an idea like that.
a shake platform. Oh my gosh, that's all right. So and now it sounds like we could move to bright tank findings. Are they different than the fermentation findings?
I would say they're similar. There's not a lot of things while during active fermentation. You're not going to want to anything you add is going to get mixed. It'll help with mixing, but it's not going to really settle out until fermentation's done. So you'll have a bigger effect if you wait till end of fermentation after fermentation's done. So yeah, either after fermentation in the fermenter or um, in your bright tank or whatever your cold side is.
Okay. But are
You
they
said,
different products?
No, same stuff.
Same stuff. Okay.
so,
And
so
clearly, as either a pro or a home brewer, at the end, let's say I've put these findings into my fermenter, preferably post fermentation, as you've just said. I'm really checking for clarity at this point too. I mean, let's talk about the real purpose here, which is clarity and how much clarity we want. So if at this time, even though I probably have a cake of some kind at the bottom of my fermenter, if the rest of the beer is perfectly clear, bright tank not necessary, right? The next vessel I'm going into is packaging, like what I'm serving from, whether that's a home brewer or a pro brewer.
Right. Yeah. And even I know Jamil was doing single tank, so he wouldn't even use a bright tank. He would ferment
right.
carbonate package straight out of one tank.
Yeah,
So
unit tanks,
you'd
right?
have to add your yes, out of the unitank, the conical. So you'd have to add this to the fermenter side to get to use it as a clarifier.
Okay. Okay. But if at the end of fermentation, I've put in these things and my beer's not as clear as I want, now we're talking about using the same things again in a bright tank. Do I have that basically right? Um,
Oh,
are we all
Huggy's gonna
frozen?
come back.
Just Huggy. There we go.
Sorry,
We can hear you.
you can hear me?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you can keep going.
I think my phone overheated. I apologize.
Oh,
Let's get it off the heater. You're in Texas. There's no heater.
it's chilly in Houston. I don't know how it is up there, man. I'm
Okay.
surprised your phone's overheating.
Well, I do see we can go back to my question, but I see that we have a question from the chat, Travis, right?
Yes. Yeah, so
good one.
Richard George Vargas, I apologize if you don't go by all three names, Richard. How do you avoid introduction of oxygen when adding clarifiers on the homebrew side? You may have discussed this, but I missed it. And Justin, you hinted at one of them. You sound like, I mean, for all the self-deprecating humor you enjoy, such as I do, uh, you do purge transfers. Sounds
Yeah.
like yeah.
And this isn't and this is going to sound like it's me being self-deprecating, but in this case it's not. I would mess up a lot of things, and I definitely learned like oxygen is just an evil substance post
Mhm.
Fermentation. So
Mhm.
that was something I just developed any method I could to CO2 purge. And so
Right.
anyhow, Richard, it's as simple as if you're using a more of an open fermenter that doesn't have a way to uh, add in CO2 and into a closed vessel with sort of a purge valve at the top. Even in a bucket or a glass carboy or a plastic carboy with an open top, CO2 is heavier than oxygen. So even then, you're just put a hose with a CO2 tank and just dump it in there and let it sit there for a while. I can't give you exactly how long, but I remember
Yeah.
whatever I would tell Jamil, he was like, "Yeah, just do more. You're fine. You're not you're not hurting anything." So and then if you have a closed vessel, you're probably more familiar than I am with how to do that. And that is, at one port you're putting in. So with a corny keg, for example, you've got an inlet and an outlet. You put the CO2 on one and you put and you let it purge. You just let the oxygen come out of the other, and you leave it on for long enough that you're comfortable that you've got a bed of CO2. That's what I always stuck in my head, was like this bed of CO2. And once I was taught that CO2 is heavier than oxygen, I just thought of whatever vessel I was using, just dumping CO2 in there, and it's going to sit there long enough for me to do my thing.
Yeah.
And of course, you just have to remember it's not going to be perfect. Even the pro brewers have an acceptable amount of O2 in their beer. In fact, they measure for it. And they know at this acceptable level, my beer's going to last this long. And at this acceptable level, my beer's only going to last that long. And so just know that this was part of my problem as a home brewer. Even as clumsy as I am, I'm such a perfectionist, and I would get in my own way about it. And so any way you can dump CO2 into whatever vessel you're using. Now, Travis, you can probably do better with this. Now we've got a vessel that's full of beer.
Right.
Maybe, and I've got to open the top. What then?
So if I'm still fermenting, I'm not concerned with a little bit of oxygen getting in there. If I'm still in my fermenter, I'm not concerned with a little bit of oxygen getting in there because the yeast will take it up. And my intention when I go to the keg is the same as yours. I'm going to have what I need in. I'm going to have a CO2 filled keg. I'm going to put what I need in there with a very brief opening. And then 99% of what's in there is going to get pushed out by beer.
Mm-hmm.
So if 3% was oxygen and now it's 1% of 100% of that 3% of oxygen, it's zeros that I don't care about of oxygen. And by the way, I still transferred some yeast because I'm not a perfectionist on my packaging. So that's not enough O2 to care about in that instance.
Okay.
Add it to a purged keg, put it during fermentation, and we're going reverse order here. Or if you're doing it during brew day, it's not an option, not an issue at all. And I'm sure, Richard, you weren't asking about brew day because that one's the obvious one.
Hmm.
So yeah, just add it to your. I mean, if you have a beer that's not coming clear enough after a week of being in your keg, then you have to make a decision. Is it worth adding the clarifier or living with the not super bright beer? And maybe just sit on the keg for another 3 weeks and it'll fall bright anyway. Which we
That's
didn't
a
get
good
to
point.
that. Huggy, we didn't get to the fact that time is quite the clarifier. I'm sure you were coming with that one towards the end of our whole process on clarifying beer.
Yeah, and real quick,
Yeah.
just Richard, though, by the way, if all else fails, just drink that shit fast.
Oh yeah.
Takes oxygen a little while to ruin your beer. So just drink it real fast.
Put it in a solo cup, nobody can see how clear it is.
And just drink it. Okay, go on, Huggy.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
My
Welcome
phone
back.
died.
Yeah, I lost everything last show we did, by the way. That was a wonderful time. I had to reboot.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll just hang out here and talk for an hour if I have to. You guys are fine. Don't worry about it. Listeners won't.
You're
All right.
outstanding, man. Quick on the draw. You get it done.
I just got a couple more. One of them's yeah, it's PBPP. So it's polyvinyl polypropylene. So it's a plastic, and it's a plastic charged particle that you can use. We used this when I was at one of the breweries I worked for, and it's very super powdery. I mean, like it was like powdered sugar, that kind of consistency. And so this is some of this stuff you don't want to breathe in, especially on a large scale. And so with this one, we'd use again at the end of fermentation into the bright kind of thing. A lot of times, if you use these clarifiers in the fermenter, and you clarify it there, and then when you transfer it to whatever your final vessel is, you leave it all behind, because legally the silica, you're supposed to filter that out according to the FDA.
Okay.
Interesting.
So not for home, but according to the FDA.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. They don't want you drinking too much. You can use a little bit of it, but it doesn't want to be in the final product. So usually you need to filter it or centrifuge it out. Now, not a ton of breweries do that necessarily, but usually we'll dump off everything off the bottom before we even start serving anyway.
Okay.
That begs the question: if I have a centrifuge, am I going to use PVPP, or am I going to rely on my centrifuge to do that clarification?
It depends. If you can, I worked at another brewery with this centrifuge. We centrifuged everything. The only thing we filtered was we had a fruited beer that we added. So we wanted to filter the yeast out before we added the fruit. So we used the filter and the centrifuge, but otherwise everything was just, we had the centrifuge dialed in that you can get super clear just from the centrifuge. And we would even pull the whole tank. So they would connect on the conical tank. They connect the racking arm that's in the middle and to the very bottom of the tank. And we would start from the racking arm, the clear spot, and then they'd slowly turn the racking arm down lower and lower as it got, as it's going through the centrifuge, and you'd slowly pull in from the bottom as well until you're pulling just from the bottom. So it let us empty the 100% of the tank out rather than.
Wow.
Because a lot of times in a professional brewery, you'll have the conical, you'll have the racking arm in the middle. You'll pull from that racking arm, but you'll rotate that arm down until it's right at your line of your beer and all of your trub and everything. So you want to get the beer above it, but all of the beer that's locked in to there into the bottom, you can't pull out. So, but if you slowly introduce that into the centrifuge, you can get it out of there. So yeah, centrifuge works great for clarification. Centrifuge is gravity times, multiple times. And so it's just kind of it speeds up basically. If you leave your beer in the fermenter, it'll get just as clear. It's just you may not be able to wait that long.
Right. Yeah. So amazingly, there's probably a home brewer out there doing a process like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just one who's made his own centrifuge, etc. So
yeah, I was thinking about that. Like they make those benchtop centrifuges for like chemistry labs, like like blood and
yeah,
doing the small little vials. But do they make like a 5-gallon size centrifuge?
well,
Right.
the concept of that is so different. The fact that flowing a product in and out of a centrifuge versus filling a bunch of vials, like I put 2 cases of beer and now I'm going to throw it in a centrifuge. You know,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be cool.
yeah. So Peter is in the Facebook chat, and I think Peter might have asked a trick question because that's kind of, I don't know. You guys know Peter Simons.
Hi,
Uh,
Peter. It's nice to see you in there, man. Long time.
Peter asks, can you add biofine clear at the start of primary fermentation?
No, because it's just gonna drop out, and your fermentation is gonna kick up and everything around it. So you want to add you don't even want to add biofine after you crashed your beer and it's like ready to serve without mixing it in. You still have to mix it in. And so if you add at the beginning of fermentation, I think it's just gonna drop out. I don't think it's gonna work.
Yeah, so my understanding of biofine clear is that it is the type of product that can take a kick up and still do its job. But I'm with you. I think it's going to be trapped in your cone or in your tube at the bottom and not do its job by the finish of fermentation.
Yeah, I think
Should you be able to resuscitate it, I think it could do its job. But I mean, when I'm towards the end of my fermentation, I'm glad I've got that yeast cake at the bottom. I don't have to deal with it anymore, and that's probably what the biofine is. Now, and the flip side of that, I thought the trick question was, will biofine clear affect your fermentation? Does it interfere with the yeast when the yeast is just trying to do its thing?
It's a good question. I don't think I wouldn't think it would. I think that the yeast would be active enough that it wouldn't. But I don't know. But I don't think
also
so.
think the volume of yeast would be far too great for that little bit of biofine clear to affect it. I mean, we use biofine clear when the yeast is almost gone, when we can't see it anymore hardly. We don't use biofine clear when we have a big turbid fermentation going on. So Peter, just don't add a bucket of biofine clear, please. I think it'll be all right.
Is there a reason he wants to add at the beginning, or just one less thing to think about later?
Oh, it's Peter. I think he tried to trip us up. So thank you, Peter.
That's a decent question, though. I like it.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Great
So I
questions.
have a question too, then, since we're doing questions. Now, you did mention that we can use Finings in the kettle, even when we're doing a New England IPA, because it's going to drop out some things that we don't want. I know brewers who centrifuge New England IPAs to get out things that they don't want. What about biofine or other products, post fermentation, even in a New England IPA, and something that we want to be hazy? Is that something that we can do? Because I know that we don't want our hazy beers to be full of yeast, for example. So
right.
Is there a good practice of using Finings even on our New England IPAs?
Yeah, I use
the kettle, of course.
Yeah, I use it even on hazy IPAs because and it doesn't drop out. That you have that polyphenol, that permanent haze from the if you're doing it right, it's not a yeast haze, it's a polyphenol haze, so it's a different size that's not going to be affected by the biofine. Even the centrifuging, they can centrifuge it out, and it's such a size that it's not going to be spun out, basically.
Okay, and so I think I can answer my own question here. It's the biofine would be attacking the things I don't want and not the things I do. So it's not like I'm just using less of it. I can use as directed, but it's still pulling out the stuff I don't want, like yeast and such, and it's going to leave the polyphenol haze.
Yeah, so it'll pull the yeast out. So you don't want that. You don't want that yeast in there anyway. That's not what your haze is going from. It's not from the yeast.
So it's not like I just use less of it. I would still use as directed to make sure I have still a tasty beer without a bunch of yeast in it.
Yeah, and if you use less, you'll have less haze, but you still have some haze. So you need to use enough of it to get all of it out, all of your things out.
See, sorry, but to me, that's great information because if I'm homebrewing a New England IPA right now, I don't know, it just seems counterintuitive. I'm automatically not going to buy anything to find it. I'm just going to, of course, I want it hazy, but that's not the type this is why so many people don't like a hazy beer because maybe they were done incorrectly.
And because I've heard of some brewers that when they mash, they don't even do a Vorloff. They just straight lauter into the kettle. And so you'll be bringing all those tannins, all that haze in that you honestly you don't want that. But I think this was when New England's when haze was first gotten popular, no one knew how to make them, so everyone was trying out whatever they could think of. Don't no Vorloff, no Whirlflock, all kinds of tricks that I think you don't want to do those things.
Okay. I can't attest that I know Huggy's secrets on NEPAs, but I can attest that I saw his progression as he learned what worked and what didn't work to make a stable haze. And he did achieve that 100%. I've had many of his hazy beers, and at least one, if not two, of the breweries he's no longer at are brewing his hazy recipes because they work right and they sell. Because they're great beers also. So Peter has shown that he was tardy to class today, but he did ask a question that kind of brings it all back together. You started off explaining what these findings pull and what they don't pull, and one of the things you started off with is we don't want to pull the proteins that produce our head, because headless beer isn't as fun as the headless horseman, or yeah. So Peter, can you strip too many good things out with the findings affecting head retention?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with that. You don't use certain findings are going to affect your heads. You don't want to use those findings in beer. But like sorry, I'm looking through my notes real quick.
See, this is always where I start to wonder too. And by the way, keep looking through your notes. But like, use as directed because it's written on the jar, or experiment with your beer, right? And I think again, I can answer my own question here. Like with beer, there's just so many variables. So I'm going to use as directed as my starting point because that's what you're supposed to, that you have to start somewhere, but you have to have brewed a lot of beer and just start to know this, right, Huggy? Like I can't just go, hey, the thing says 1 teaspoon, so that's what I'm going to do. And my head it's going to be perfect. It might not be perfect. I'm going to have to mess with
it. Yeah. So the silica, I found my notes here. It adsorbs the hydrophilic haze active proteins with a molecular weight larger than those proteins that promote positive foam development. So this should pull out those larger proteins,
larger ones
that you don't want in there,
size,
and leave the smaller proteins behind. Yeah.
Peter, who is an outstanding, I think you met Huggy. During we go back to it as we discussed earlier, Justin, when he was opening up his brewery, our local homebrew club was having online meetings, and Huggy joined us and Vinny joined us. Sadly, I don't think anyone asked you to join us, Justin, because that would have been outstanding. And I think Peter had joined us for at least one of them. And I think that's probably where Peter and Huggy might have met. Peter is not just a beer kind of guy. He's a beer kind of historian kind of guy. When we take trips overseas, he's like finding the library that's 1,000 years old with brewing books that no one's ever heard of and stuff, and looking at the notes. So, Peter, I wish you were on the call today. It'd be pretty damn fun with you here, but I just have to read your Facebook notes, which are almost as fun.
We'll get him on a future show.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know we have another show to do tonight, and we're doing it with you guys, so I want to make sure you have time for that also. Is there anything that we missed or any kind of closing notes here about using findings in our beer?
Yeah, I guess two things or a couple things I want to jump in real quick. Okay. So you can use diatomaceous earth, DE. That's the little, it's old sea creatures, old seashells from millions of years ago that they use when they do filters. There's a DE filters, and that can be basically that in the same thing. It says little pores that'll trap all of your all the material you're trying to keep out of the beer. They use it on the filtering side, so it'll be filtered through this matrix, but then that DE can be rewashed and reused several times until it's kind of filled up.
Okay. Then do you use that as a finder or strictly as a filtering?
It's used as like it's kind of like, it's not a fining that you add to the beer. It's used in as the filter bed basically.
Okay.
So it filters through it, but it has the same effect of stripping those things out.
Okay.
And then you also can have enzymes. So enzymes are proteins that it's a process that'll change the beer. And so you can add pectinase if you're adding any kind of fruit and you want to get that pectin haze out. You want to use a pectinase that'll break down that pectin. And then Clarity Firm is another one that White Labs makes, and that breaks up the larger proteins, including the gluten, into smaller bits, and that'll help with your clarity, even though it's not technically a fining agent, or maybe it is, but it's an enzyme that you add, but it has kind of the same effect.
Yeah, and that one also makes your beer. They're not allowed to call it gluten-free, but it's such a low, untraceable amount. They have to call it gluten-reduced at White Labs.
Right.
My understanding is that it is such a low amount that it is effectively gluten-free, by the way. If you were a pro brewer, you also can't call it gluten-free. But if you're a home brewer giving your gluten-free buddies gluten-free beer, you can call it gluten-free if you use that. I'm gonna go on record.
I have a buddy that runs a lab. He's what do you call it? Biochemist. And they were doing tests with it before it became a marketable product. And he said, forget about it. It's not there. It's done.
Yeah. I'm pretty good friends with the maker of that product. I'm not going to quote him here because I don't want to get him in legal trouble, but pretty much everybody knows, except for the FDA, that you're good to go on that gluten-free beer if you use Clarity Firm. Yeah, I've always asked why pro brewers don't use it in every beer, Huggy. Because I just thought, like, if it doesn't affect flavor, if it has these extra bonuses, and I was always told it's just because it's an added cost. It can be kind of expensive to use in every single beer. Is that your experience, Huggy, or
yeah, there actually is a brewery. I know Austin Beer Works out of Austin used to use it in all their beers. They didn't advertise it, and so then they could say, yeah, all of our beers are gluten reduced because of that, and it would help with clarity. I've used it in the past, and it does help. It adds some cost. It's just another step you got to add as well, because you want to add that at the beginning of fermentation. You got to add it to the fermenter, not to the hot side, because heating will denature those enzymes. So it's just one extra step that you got to do, and keep everything clean and sanitary. It has a few bucks to each batch, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not a big deal.
Okay. All right, gentlemen. Is that about cover it today?
Yeah, just watch your fluffy bottoms.
There you go.
Definitely. That's gonna be the title of the show, I think. Watch your fluffy bottoms.
So Peter, if you'll hang out, we're gonna have a Q&A show coming up next, and it's all about answering these questions, these soft and hard and tricky questions you're sending us. Anyone listening live, I hope you'll stick around and send us some more questions. Huggy's gonna stick around, so anything you think he might know or might not know, lots of fun.
That's right. If you're listening live, you can do it in the chat room on Facebook. And we always try to post before we do this. So if you're listening on the podcast and you want to catch the next one, just make sure you follow the Brewing Network on Facebook there, and we'll get it out there. You can also send your questions in advance, because we're always doing Q&A shows. Just send them to brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com. That's brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com. And they go straight to Travis, I think, so that he can weed them out for us.
So throw me under the bus there. Yeah, I do get them now.
There we go. All right. Thanks again to Blickman Engineering for sponsoring Brew Strong and allowing us, after all these years, to keep bringing you this show, which is, in my opinion, always full of great information. And I thank Travis and Jamil and Michael, who's not with us tonight, for all the work that they do on the show. So thanks to Blickman Engineering. Huggy, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I had a good time.
Absolutely. And if you're listening to the podcast or live right now, Huggy's going to join us for the Q&A, because I am completely unreliable at random questions. So we've got Travis and Huggy coming back to help answer your questions. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of each other and your beer.
Brew Strong.